Hare Krishna, and welcome to our 7th class in the Nectar of Instruction, Sri Upadeshamrita of Srila Rupa Goswami. We're going to conclude our study of the 3rd verse today, and we're excited for my favorite time of the week. So we're enthusiastic, and without further ado, we'll pass the baton to Kishore Gopi for some clear time.
Great idea. Okay, musicians out now. Okay, so come into your comfortable seat. And just shimmy, shake away anything from your day that doesn't need your attention right now. As we shift our attention, our focus to our study of Shastra tonight, and right now in this meditation on the holy name. As we were talking about on Sunday night, the soul beat. The soul beat. Take a deep breath in, fill up. Bhagavan ki Haribo.
Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatarupyascha Kripasantupyeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Go to Premanande Haribo. Wow. We have a really lively crew in person here. So that's awesome. And great to be with our online contingent and our YouTube contingent. We love you, all of you. And so we're looking at the rest of the third verse. Utsahan nischaya dharya tat tat karma pavartanat sangatyagat satovrite shadpir bhaktir prasidyati. The things that prasidya, that nourish devotion. So we talked about utsahan, enthusiasm, nischaya, confidence, and dharya, patience, last week. And we had some beautiful reflections. Let's have just a little reiteration or echoing or re-exploration of anything around enthusiasm, confidence, and patience. I appreciated, Leanne, your comment on the WhatsApp. If you want to start it off, that would be great. Break the ice for us.
Sure. So, if I remember correctly what I put, how how the enthusiasm comes, and then confidence is there, but then there's even more enthusiasm when the confidence comes even more. And then I've been also realizing throughout the day too, today, that it seems like as you learn more, there's more confidence, right? So this is what I'm exploring. And then I think then tying it all together, then it like opens the heart as you are more enthusiastic and you keep learning, and it keeps coming into the heart space, and then bhakti, right? So but when I look back at things, it's always been that kind of like correlation and connection through learning, and when I first came in contact with bhakti. So
beautiful.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I appreciate how you're pointing out how things feed into each other. There's that the beginner's enthusiasm we can all have about anything, and then to kind of be able to stay the course, you need to keep filling the tank. And so that mature enthusiasm comes in different ways, and one thing you pointed out is by learning. And actually Krishna himself mentions this in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. He says that one should purify one's relationship with a mantra by learning about it, by studying it. So for example, we are studying the Hare Krishna Mahamantra because we're cultivating a relationship with that mantra very deeply. It's a very intimate mantra, it's very personal. And so our acharyas have written songs about it. Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and others have given commentaries on it. Lord Chaitanya wrote the Shikshastakam really about it and the devotee's relationship with it. And so this study of Krishna's names is actually a very central function of our practice, because it does exactly what you're talking about. It helps us to develop a sense of who we are, what the mantra is, how we relate, what our goal is, what the obstructions are, all these different things. What is the path? And when those things become more clear, it's like when you have a map, you become more confident. If you have a guide, you become more confident. If you have a full tank of gas, like all these things make it easier to feel like, yeah, okay, it's dark out, it's confusing, but still, I know I can get there. So that's through knowledge, through appropriate knowledge of our for example, mantra or anything else about our practice. Is that when that becomes clear and clarified and light is cast on it, then the confidence increases, and then you can move from kind of like exuberant, youthful, kind of immature enthusiasm to steady confidence. It's like, yeah, this is not just cool. I actually understand why I'm doing it. It makes sense. That reminds me of one of the aspects of our talk last week, is that when it comes to confidence, there was forget if it was Srila Prabhupada or Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentioned that as long as there are doubts and the doubts are unaddressed, then one cannot achieve complete confidence. So that kind of speaks to what you're saying, is that when we have our questions answered, sometimes preemptively by like, oh, wow, that's really useful information, then the confidence level naturally rises. And it's not a separate endeavor. It's like, I've got to hype myself up, you know? It's not like a locker room before a football game or something, one of those high school football movies, like where they give a rousing speech. You know, it's like the product of actually doing the work in practice, you know, week in and week out. And you go into the game, you're like, I'm going to crush this thing because I know exactly what I'm doing. And so it's very meticulous. Yeah, it's very thought out. It's not a whimsical or sentimental thing. Although this is an emotional experience, the devotional service is about the emotions of the soul. It's not whimsical and it's not sentimental. It's very well reasoned. So thank you for that. Any more reflections from Utsaha, Nishchaya, Daurya, the confidence, enthusiasm, confidence, and patience? Yes.
So I really appreciated the enthusiasm, and I feel very enthusiastic, and you make it very easy to fill the tank. But when I step out of here, I live in a complete world of non-devotees. So I guess for me, I have to just try to find more patience, maybe in myself, to keep it going and to not let it go, because I can't just, leave my family and my house. So I feel like I live in two separate worlds. So I feel so much in my heart and enthusiasm, but sometimes it's hard to find the confidence, but I guess then maybe I have to have more patience. And then, like you said, each thing just fills the other one up.
Right.
So maybe the patience will give me the confidence, but I always have enthusiasm.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a good start.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's very practical, because none of our acharyas have advised the immature renunciation of like one's familial or social duties. That just causes chaos. It's like, it can seem like a good idea, but there's a way in which, like you're saying, when one starts to feel like, I wish I could do this more, I wish that I could spend more time with people who are like-minded and pursuing a spiritual path, and I feel this natural burgeoning of enthusiasm in the presence of these kinds of people and in the performance of these kinds of activities. That's a spiritual experience itself. That's actually a spiritual experience, and those are spiritual desires. So sometimes I get asked, this is probably one of the most common, if there's a top 10 list of most common questions that are asked across the board, one of them is like, I wish that I could do more in devotional service. Like, what do I do about this? Right? That would be like probably top 5. And so one of the ways I answer it, or not even answer, but like speak to it, is to say, would you rather be surrounded by Krishna's deities and devotees and be thinking of, I'd rather be watching television? Or would you rather be in the middle of all the distractions the universe has to throw at you and be thinking, oh my goodness, I really just want to be reading more books by Srila Prabhupada and chanting Hare Krishna. I wish I could do more. Because that second situation is actually a very blessed situation. And because that desire, that mature desire of like realizing that I want that, that's how things move. That's not a cheap or insignificant thing, because Krishna responds to that. Right? And the first situation, you're very fortunate, but you're kind of like catching that person on the way down.
Right.
They're asking for some other kind of stuff and they're going to get it. It's like, and then maybe they'll miss their good fortune. So, I appreciated your pointing out that I wish I could be more confident and continue to express enthusiasm, but there are parts of my life that I have to deal with things that are not exactly spiritual, but I'm patient because I'm sure that Krishna will come through for me. Which, Rupa Goswami, just a little bit of a side about Rupa and his brother Sanatana Goswami, the two elder Goswamis of the followers of Lord Chaitanya, they were very, very cultured gentlemen. They were very intelligent, extremely well established in the world. They came from wealth, they came from culture and distinction. They were very successful at everything they did. And circumstantially, right around when they started to get into bhakti in a serious way, they were working for the rulers of their area of India at the time. And because of that, they were working for people who didn't really have spiritual aspirations, to put it mildly. But they were so good at what they did that they were considered indispensable. They couldn't leave their jobs. They were like the top, the cream of the crop in what they were doing. So they were living in a world where they're like, it's almost like, imagine you're the best at what you do in your profession. So much so that the world wants you to come to like conferences and do TED Talks about it, but it's so completely anti-devotional. And in your heart, you're thinking, I really just want to be chanting and reading Srimad Bhagavatam. In fact, at one point, Sanatana Goswami, he told the king that it was employing him, I can't come to work, I'm really sick. And so the king was really worried because he was so indispensable. He sent his court physician to see him. And the physician came back. And the king said, tell me what's happening with Sanatana. Is he okay? He's fine. He's in there with a bunch of brahmanas reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the king went to him and said, what is this? I need you. And at that point, Sanatana was like, actually, I've had enough. I can't do this anymore. So the point is, Rupa Goswami, when he's talking about patience, this is what he went through, disengaging from really bad association and from his previous activities and committing himself to Lord Chaitanya, who had appeared in that very time and had met him. So you can imagine what was happening to his heart. So it's not at all outside of his frame of reference, and it's something that comes up for devotees again and again. So you're not alone, all the way from the top to the present day. That's regular experience. Be patient. Hare Krishna.
Well, and if I might jump into
Yeah.
something you said last time, is how can I find the things that I love and turn them to Krishna? And I think that that's like a perfect example too. Like I definitely relate to everything that you're saying, and that's kind of opened my eyes to be like, what am I doing that I love that I can make an offering in a way that spiritualizes it? So I feel like I am doing devotional service, just not like what I thought devotional service was. And so even also you said like devotional service is practice in Sangha. And I think that that's something that I've truly benefited from being in Sangha with all of you and really being able to open my eyes to how you said devotional service is not just one thing.
Right. Thank you. Beautiful. We're going to touch on that again today when we talk about Tat Karma Pravartana, to follow the activities of devotional service. Any other reflections from last week before we continue? Okay. So, oh yeah, please. Let me turn on the volume. Go ahead.
I had a question. You had used an analogy that I think I didn't quite fully understand when you were talking about sort of having a fixed and steady practice versus like a flickering and unsteady practice. And you mentioned an analogy around like a building and the foundation of the building. Right. And I just was wondering if you could kind of restate that, because sure. I don't think I wrote down exactly what you were saying.
Yeah. So it was in the context of confidence and or patience that this bhakti practice is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so it's not enough to just be like really fired up and enthusiastic one time, because we want to persevere, we want to stay the course. And that steadiness is what really translates to earning Krishna's trust. Just like in any relationship, we don't want just someone who does some huge flashy thing for us, right? To show us their love. People who show up like day in and day out and are really there for us, that wins the heart. So for the sake of creating stability and steadiness in our practice, I use the analogy of a building. And what I was saying was that the taller a building is going to be, the wider its base has to be. It's just architecture, because it has to be stable. And if you're going to go really up high, you're going to deal with wind and so much weight. And so you have to have a wider base. So the wider a base is means you have to put all that work in up front. And when you're building the base to a building, it's really undramatic. It's a giant hole in the ground. Like there's nothing really you can see that's above ground level. It's actually all below the ground. It's a bunch of poured concrete. It's super boring. And it's like, that's all the fundamentals we do in our practice. The stuff that's underneath the surface, right? And it's not glamorous. It doesn't get any play. To kind of like use the sport analogy I gave earlier. It's not like the big plays that win a sports game. It's all the repetition of the very, very, very regular moment to moment things that happen in a game that you did like 100,000 times in practice. I think it was Bruce Lee said, "I don't fear the man who has practiced 1,000 punches. I fear the man who has practiced one punch 1,000 times." So if you become really good at the fundamentals, that's the foundation of your building. It's like, it's super not glamorous. It's just really simple stuff. And it doesn't look like there's a building at all, but because it's all there, you put that work in, you can build a really tall building. So we're going all the way to Krishna. We're not trying to do some cheap thing here. So our fundamentals are all important. So really getting down a quality program of hearing and chanting, really getting down appreciation for the devotees and associating with them. These kinds of basic fundamental things that are so central, and doing them really well and doing them regularly is really what it takes to build that building. That's kind of what I was talking about. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to today's verse. Well, it's the same verse, but we'll share the verse and we'll share the last 3 items of the verse. Oh, first screen. So again, the verse is Utsahan Nischayat Theryat Tat Karma Pravartana Sangatyagat Sato Vritte Sharpir Bhaktiv Prasiddhyati. There are 6 principles favorable to the execution of pure devotional service. The last 3, because we talked about the first 3. 4 is acting according to regulative principles, such as Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam, hearing, chanting, and remembering Krishna. 5, abandoning the association of non-devotees. And 6, following the footsteps of the previous acharyas. These 6 principles undoubtedly assure the complete success of pure devotional service. So, the 4th one is tat karma pravartana, to, as Prabhupada says, act according to the regulative principles. And let me find the section of the purport where it begins talking about this. Right. So in the word for word and the translation, Srila Prabhupada, he accentuates when it comes to following the regulative principles, means to follow the angas, the limbs, the core practices of bhakti. He mentions Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam, hearing, chanting, remembering, the 3 on the first 3 on the list of devotional activities, and really the 3 most central. And being attached to these is actually tat karma pravartana, is this item that ensures success to do the practices of bhakti. And he also mentions that this refers to, in the purport, he says, this also refers to the regulative principles of yamas and niyamas, do's and don'ts. Or technically, yama is don'ts and niyama is do's. So the regulative principles he mentions in the purport. In this Krishna consciousness movement, there are 4 basic regulative principles: forbidding illicit sex, meat eating, gambling, and intoxication. A devotee must be very enthusiastic about following these principles. If they become slack in following any of them, their progress will certainly be checked. So the analogy given here is like you're trying to start a fire. Anybody who's gone out camping, trying to start a fire, or if you just want to start a barbecue. If you want to start a fire, but you're doing it in the rain, it's very challenging. But it's even more insidious if you're trying to start a fire, but your other hand is pouring water on at the same time. It's like really self-defeating. So the idea is that these particular principles and other principles that we follow, the do's and don'ts, they're useful because we're trying to set the heart on fire, so to speak. We're trying to actually create something, and they are counterproductive. So, for example, like intoxication, when you're under the influence of an intoxicating substance, it's difficult to impossible to understand what you're experiencing independently versus what's being imposed on you by some chemical and external experience. So you lose touch with being grounded in with your actual mature progress, because it's like, how much is me and how much is just this, thing that my brain is going through. So that gets in the way of practice, because our devotional practice is personally realized. It's not a theoretical thing. And if something is getting in the way, if it's creating interference, like with a radio signal, if it's creating interference with your station, you can't tune in. you can only get every third word or second word, or even 4 out of every 5 words. You can create a lot of noise, a lot of static, and it slows you down. So it's one of the reasons why we avoid intoxication. So very practically, these kinds of principles are there, not just to practice bhakti, but to avoid certain things, especially certain core things that are really not helpful. And as always, when it comes to the do's and don'ts, yama, the don'ts, and niyama, the do's, the easy way to understand how they relate is that by practicing the positives, by hearing about Krishna, like getting into kirtan, by reading, Bhagavad Gita and Nectar of Instruction, by associating with devotees, these are all positive things that we can do. And actually we're all doing. By offering our food to Krishna, or by eating the food that's been offered to Krishna, all these nice things. By that kind of experience, even if we are currently unable to let go of things that are bad for us and harmful for our spiritual practice, we can and will become empowered to let go. So it's actually a profoundly positive philosophy, because that's how things work. Ultimately, in the long run, nobody gives up something in a mature and steady and long-lasting way. Like, you can give anything up in the short term, but to really truly give up something, you can only do that if you have something better. It's like if you're dealing with a child. If they have something in their hands that's not good for them, if you just yank it out of their hands, they're just going to find it later. They're never going to forget about it. In fact, they'll hold a grudge against you for doing that. But if you give them something that's better for them and more interesting, they'll drop that thing so fast that they were holding on to, because, oh, shiny, right? That's the nature of the mind. That's the nature of the child. That's what we're dealing with. So it's like, Krishna is very shiny. Get yourself some spiritual experience, and you'll start to feel like, man, I really don't like that whole going to the bar thing and getting drunk, for example, right? For example, sometimes people come to bhakti and they're like holding on to these habits that they know aren't good for them. And sometimes they may lament, I don't know how to get rid of them. Well, it's really easy. You fill that cup with positive things and all the negative things will start to leak out. It's like if this cup was filled with black ink, right? Just pour clean water in it as much as you can. And eventually it'll start to overflow and the ink will start to wash out. And the ink, it'll become actually more and more clear as the water replaces the ink. It's like, yeah, I don't have time for all that other stuff. So there's both the positive practices of bhakti we're meant to cultivate, and to avoid the negative things that get in our way, avoid the impediments. So that's, both of these things are there for us. So on that topic, Srila Prabhupada says a few things, as does Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Srila Prabhupada says, neglect of the regulated principles will destroy devotional service. Neglect is an interesting word. Look up the word neglect. Sometimes I find it's useful to look at etymologies. Okay, neglect, the state or fact of being uncared for, to fail to care for properly. So it's like what we heard about in the last week, that bhakti is a cultivation. It's a kind of cultivation. Therefore, it's about action. It's not just like feeling, so it's not just feeling in an abstraction. It's like your action, what you do. So neglecting means to fail to care for properly, like you have a plant or something, or a goldfish you never fed and you neglected it. So regulative principles, in one place, Srila Prabhupada refers to them as the regulative principles of freedom. They're principles by which we can, by following them, we become more free. We've talked about this in other classes. Mm-hmm. So the healthy way to look at principles like the regulative principles, the things that we're trying to avoid, is that they're not just like, oh, I'm afraid of those activities, so I don't do them. They're bad. It's like, yeah, but what does bad really mean? Bad is like a visceral thing. It's like, break it down. It's actually the principle of avoiding something that's not good for you is actually a friend. That principle is actually like a companion. It's good for us, It's like sometimes people wonder what it would be like to not have physical pain so much. There is a biological condition where you can't feel pain, and it's actually terrible, because if you can't feel pain, you don't know how to avoid bad situations for your body, even really basic ones. And when children don't have that, they usually don't live very long. because their body will just get scraped and bruised and bumped and broken bones, and they'll chew their tongue and they don't know it's bad for them. So pain serves a function. So the regulative principles that don't do that, it's not good for you. It's not just like trying to push our fear button. It's actually our friend. It's like, yeah, you don't want to go over there. That's going to like take up so much of your time. It's going to cause you so many troubles. Like, trust me, it's not good for you. So if we neglect that friend, if we neglect that, if we start to like take it for granted that, oh yeah, but I can kind of play with that energy. I can kind of mess with it. I'm doing pretty good in bhakti. Like I can kind of like dip my toe in there. That's like consciously neglecting those principles. That's what Prabhupada's talking about. That can really harm you. You know, they're not things to be played with. Like you can't like sort of a little bit stick a fork in an electrical socket and just get away with it. You just can't. It's not going to be good for you. Fire will burn. So that's some thoughts on that. So don't be neglectful. Interesting, because neglectful is a conscious thing. It's an active thing. It's like there's a difference between not being fully able to let go of something that's not good for you. That's honest, and that's, you know, like, oh, I wish I could give up this bad habit completely, but this is where I'm at. And then there's being neglectful, where it's like, well, I know it's not good for me, and I can give it up. Maybe I have given it up for some time, but I'm going to start to kind of like, you know, keep it around, and maybe I'll water it a little bit. Maybe I'll give it a name, make a little pet out of it. It's like turning our relationship with our bad habits into like, you know, this weird thing where we maintain them. Not so good. In the offenses to the holy name, we hear that it's an offense to maintain material attachments. It's not an offense to have material attachments. We all have material attachments. That's why we're here. But it's an offense in our chanting to maintain them. Maintenance takes work. Maintenance is a conscious thing. So maintaining our relationship with the material energy, it's like being in a toxic relationship. You got to write your Dear John letter. You're like, you know what? You were so bad for me. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to do this thing anymore. It's like, I'm not holding on to this. I'm not going to have this secret clandestine love affair with the external energy where she just like beats me up and I'm like always unhappy. This toxic relationship. So don't maintain. Even if you can't let go of it completely, don't maintain, you know, faith and trust in habits that you know are not good for you. Like, understand that they're not going to do what you can to let go of them. So those are some thoughts on that. Not being neglectful, as Prabhupada says. I found one useful phrase by Srila Prabhupada I want to share. He defines tat karma pravartana as varied engagement in devotional service. Varied engagement in devotional service. This is the fourth principle of these six that's good for us. What's good for us? Varied engagement in devotional service. I find that really concise. Prabhupada's system is such a master of concise expression. So engagement, you're engaging, you're doing things, but it's varied. It's like, yeah, I don't just do this one thing. It's like, I like giving class, I like reading, I like talking about it, but I don't just do that, you know. And we all chant Hare Krishna. That's really important, but we don't also just do that. It's good to have some variation. It's good to be around, as Caitlin was saying, like realize that bhakti doesn't just look one way. There's different things that people are good at, and they're going to contribute, and that I can contribute. And even if I can't do everything, and usually we can't, just appreciating the gifts of others and like, oh wow, like, okay. Like, I'm not a very visual person, but I remember when one of the devotees that I was serving with in Toronto made a painting of Jagannath, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. I could never do that, but that is super. I just stared at it. It's like, wow, you know, varied engagement, just using your eyes. So, you know, varied engagement in devotional service. 5 words. So concise. And then he says, Srila Prabhupada does, thus we hold continuous activities in devotional service 24 hours daily. And so Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about this as well. He talks at length on the tat karma pravartana, varied engagement in devotional service. So, as we've mentioned before, the 9 angas or main limbs of bhakti, can list again. Shravanam, to hear about. Kirtanam, to speak about or glorify or to chant. Smaranam, to remember. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, to serve lotus feet. Archanam, to worship, as in deity worship. Vandanam, prayer. Dasyam, to consider oneself a servant, sakyam atmanivedanam, and to be considering the Lord one's friend, and to consider what to surrender oneself completely. And each one of those has so many different divisions. So there's an extensive list of them in the Nectar of Devotion, also by Rupa Goswami, and they're broken down into 64 further items, angas. And it's interesting that of all of them, what Rupa Goswami lists first is to basically accept spiritual instruction, to accept a spiritual master, even before one takes initiation, to accept spiritual teachers. I thought that was really worth pointing out, because we're actually all doing that right now, because we're deciding, yeah, you know what, Srila Prabhupada is worth listening to, Rupa Goswami is worth listening to, and I guess I'm worth transmitting that to some degree. And so there's this principle of being aware that knowledge flows, and it comes from those who have applied knowledge and received it honestly themselves. And that's just a function of all education. We talked about this in Bhagavad Gita, that the principles of knowledge begin with humility and pridelessness, because if you think you have all the answers, you can't learn anything. If you think you're done, you're done. As as one of the drum instructors I know said, as soon as you think you're done learning how to play the drum, you're done. Because you can't take anymore. You're full, cup's full. So just that point of bhakti actually begins from asking the question, like, how can I learn? Just like Arjuna asked, like, I can't figure it out, Krishna, you help me. Then it all comes to him, you know. So be an empty cup, be receptive. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur also says something very beautiful and very practical. With everything that we're doing around serving Krishna and these practices of bhakti, sometimes it can be really easy to, even tempting to neglect or bypass our day-to-day activities. He says that one should be merciful and show compassion to all living entities. In fact, he says it's a must. You know, if you don't cultivate kindness to living entities in just the day-to-day context, you can't really practice bhakti. There's going to be a ceiling to your bhakti, in other words, right? I gave the example in the Bhagavad Gita course at some point that Bhaktisiddhanta was walking, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, Srila Prabhupada's guru, lifelong renunciate, extremely pure, dedicated devotee, started a national movement and attempted to spread it outside of India. Of course, with Srila Prabhupada, he was successful. His disciple ended up taking around the world. And on one of his walks, you know, his disciples, many of whom were also sannyasis, like lifelong renunciates and taken vows, senior monks, they were walking through some holy place, I don't know exactly where, and they were passing by some beggars, people asking for help. And his followers were focusing on their practice, chanting Hare Krishna and so forth. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta stopped them and said, because he could sense that there was some bypassing, some avoidance of the basic compassion one should have. And he instructed them about how, whether or not you end up giving, you shouldn't have a hard heart. You shouldn't think yourself better than others. And if you overlook other people on the basis that, well, I'm practicing bhakti, so this is more important, even though bhakti is the supreme activity, it becomes eroded. You know, our qualification for bhakti will become eroded if we do not have compassion and mercy and care for other people and don't deal with them. And Rupa Goswami says in the Nectar of Devotion, when talking about the angas of bhakti, the limbs of bhakti, he says one should be not neglectful in ordinary dealings. This is not directly an anga of bhakti, but it's something on which one builds a foundation. If one is neglectful in ordinary dealings, one is rude, unkind, or breaks the law, is immoral, they're pouring water while they're trying to start a fire, right? They can create a great deal of practical trouble for themselves and their relationships, legally, morally, and at least there can be some dissonance, right? You're trying to serve Krishna. I mean, Krishna doesn't want us to just be like stepping on other people, so it doesn't really work that way. Even though at the higher levels of bhakti, one may neglect lower principles like following all the rules and regulations of society are not as important as actually serving God with all your heart. Even the Bible says that. However, doesn't mean we can whimsically neglect other people. And often we find at the lower levels, before one is really advanced very, very, very high in bhakti, it can be a temptation to avoid the ordinary dealings for the sake of our spiritual practice. And that's just kind of like, if we look closer at it, it's really just kind of self-serving. So just pointing that out. Bhaktivinoda Thakur echoes that one should be merciful and compassionate. Other things he says that I wanted to share with regards to varied engagement in devotional service is we should try to avoid offenses. This has come up in our classes, to know what the offenses are to the holy name and to deliberately try to avoid those offenses. So just like devotional service is a cultivation, when you're cultivating, you want to make sure you don't get weeds in your garden. So if you know what the weeds look like, it's important for gardeners to know what the weeds look like. Otherwise, if you don't know what the weed looks like and you think it's just another good plant you're growing, you could lose your crop. So it's important to, as you were saying, Leanne, have knowledge. And some of that knowledge includes knowledge of what the anarthas or useless things or weeds are, so that as gardeners of the heart, we can find the stones and rocks and useless clay, and also the weeds that can grow and choke out the bhakti. So avoiding offenses in our chanting, so forth. And the principle of avoiding offenses also extends very much to how we deal with devotees. We want to treat devotees kindly because they're very dear to Krishna, and Krishna is very attached to them. And so there's this principle of dealing kindly with the devotees. And also part of that is, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur points out deliberately, is avoiding hearing criticism, blasphemy, criticism. Like, if it's not one's service to hear criticism of another, then you have the privilege of not having to. So don't cultivate it. So sometimes if you're in a position of authority, you have the responsibility of holding somebody to a higher standard, and hopefully, privately, with discretion, choosing the time and place to point out how they could or perhaps even should do something better. That's a very sober and serious service to take on. And it's one that comes, when you're ready for it. And if you don't have that service, be glad, because it's not easy. And you get a lot of resistance when you're doing that service. And if it's not your service to critique others, don't cultivate it, because it actually erodes one's bhakti. Because if one cultivates a critical attitude, it's very easy. It's a very easy thing to do, and it's a trap, because it's really easy to start thinking yourself better than others, and to start focusing all of one's discrimination and discernment on how other people or the world or society is actually not good. And it can become a trap. It's like, I do that to avoid looking at my own stuff, right? Or to feel better about myself. So one should try to be strict with oneself and liberal with others, generally speaking. And so part of that is just not hearing criticism. If that means that your own mind is unnecessarily critical of others. This came up in the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, when one devotee, or one aspiring devotee, came to him and said, "My Lord, I used to think your whole movement was so sentimental, and I was so critical of your followers, and with this tongue I used to just say so many awful things about them, and I feel so bad because I've realized you're the real thing, bhakti is the real thing, and I'm convinced now, but I have so much shame, I don't know what to do about this." And Lord Chaitanya said, with that same tongue you used to criticize the devotees, use that same tongue to glorify them. So if you find that your mind is very critical, deliberately apply your mind in praise and gratitude. If you find your tongue is critical, deliberately turn it around. And if you're in the kind of association that's unnecessarily critical, I gave this example, you can just say, well, I'm just trying to practice gratitude. You can choose to avoid that kind of association. And that's the next item. To avoid sangatyaga, to avoid unnecessary, unhelpful association. But before I go there, one more thing Bhaktivinoda Thakur said about varied engagement in devotional service. This came up in Bhagavad Gita too. He said to find out what is most dear to you in any realm and offer that to Krishna. Like if you really like something, before you put on your favorite thing of clothes or whatever that you bought for yourself, you offer it to Krishna. This principle of finding what you really love and offering it to Krishna first. This is actually an activity of devotional service that it's really practical, and I find really sweet to remind devotees about, remind myself about. Any comments, questions, reflections on Tat Karma Pravartana, varied engagement in devotional service, before we get to the last two items? How is our online crew, our Zoom team, our Zoomers? Doing good? Okay.
I'm just enjoying your quote that Krishna is very shiny.
It's very shiny. The pigeon-like mind, Ooh, tinfoil. Right? Krishna is really shiny. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so continuing then. Tat tat karma pravartanat sangha tyagat. Tyaga means to let go of. Sangha means association. So sangha tyaga means useless association. I was talking about letting go of association is very critical, like full of criticism. That's not good association. That's the kind of association that critiques bhakti or critiques devotees. You can just kind of like exclude that. So Srila Prabhupada says, furthermore, in order to be successful in devotional service, one must give up the association of undesirable people. And Lord Chaitanya says in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Asat Sangatyag e Vaishnava Achar, which means characteristically, a Vaishnava, a devotee, is one who gives up the association of worldly people or non-devotees. So this principle of association, what is association? This is a Sangha, right? We're all here. The word Sangha is actually really interesting. Sa-anga. Anga means like a limb, right? Just like Ashtanga, the 8-limb path of yoga. Or if you're taking a yoga class, you might practice Chatur Anga, different kinds of Angas. And so Sa-anga, Sa means with, right? To be connected with. And so just like our bhakti path, we defined as remember, to reconnect, or religion, to reconnect. We're trying to reconnect with the divine. So our capacity to do that has a lot to do with how we're connecting with other people, because we're social animals, we're social beings, and this path is profoundly personal. Although everybody has a unique relationship with Krishna, with the divine, it's a relationship. It's about us as a person. And so the system that Krishna has given us to come to him is profoundly personal, not coincidentally. That's his design. We want to go to a world where we're associating with Krishna with love and service. So our practice for that is the association of devotees here, because it's not like it's just me and the divine and everyone else is irrelevant. That's actually a really low level of devotional consciousness. And that's not what the spiritual world is like. It's profoundly cooperative. And so spiritual practice means deliberately cultivating anga, connection with devotees. And so the negative side of that, or the don't side of that, is to give up the undesirable association. So this principle of association, and both Srila Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur affirm that, in our lives, especially for people who are not renunciates, which is everybody here, nobody here is a monk, we may have to, and we do have to, associate with people in the world, right? And so as much as possible, doing our duties, but keeping our inner self reserved for those that we choose to give our heart to, and receiving the values from those that we choose to receive from, right? Just like in an intimate relationship. In an intimate relationship, a committed relationship, we only do certain activities with that person. We only reveal certain sides of ourselves with that person. We only make certain jokes with that person. Nobody else gets to call us by the pet names that they can call us by, right? There's a certain kind of privilege that's there. And nobody who's ever been in an intimate relationship would say that's inappropriate. That's actually completely appropriate. That is absolutely appropriate. If one treated everybody the exact same way they treated their intimate partner, that will be strange. It will be inappropriate and not really cultured, and it would create problems. Aside from like judgmental statements like it's not really cultured, it would be actually just impractical and problematic. So similarly, we have different kinds of relationships with different people. I mean, like I have a relationship with the bank teller at a bank, right? We have relationships with people on the road when we're driving a car. Everybody's related to each other all the time on some level, and we're all spirit souls. And we have a responsibility to exercise discernment with respect to, okay, this is a spirit soul, they're part of Krishna, and so am I. And aside from that, eternal spiritual truth, which means I must treat them with respect. and I must remember that they're a spirit soul. What is happening, you know, temporally and materially in this moment, in this place? What is our relationship, right? So Srila Prabhupada gives the example, like, one should love all living beings. That does not mean one would go and embrace a tiger, right? Because the function of the tiger is that they're going to eat you. You know, nothing personal, they'll just do it. So there's that old story, the parable of, like, how was it, the horse or whatever is trying to cross the stream, and they find a scorpion that's drowning, and they pick up the scorpion, and I forget how it goes. Like, basically, like, there's the thing of, like, out of compassion, they try to pick up the scorpion, but then they're surprised when the scorpion stings them. And then as they're both going down, they're both drowning in the water. The horse says to the scorpion, "Why did you do that?" And the scorpion says, "Well, why'd you pick me up? What did you expect was going to happen? I'm a scorpion," right? It's like, you can love, but how we express our love is different with everybody. So just like we don't express our love to all of our friends and all the strangers, just like we do with our intimate partner, we don't treat all living beings exactly the same way externally, although internally we see that they're all on the same level. So association is an internal thing. Because we're in the world, it doesn't mean that we don't associate externally with people. We have to. We are doing that. But the question is there of how we use our discernment to see, like, what is actually my duty to them here, and what is my duty to myself also, right? And on the extreme end of it is, okay, is this person like a scorpion? Are they helplessly going to cause harm in this situation, right? And so in that situation, you can't really blame the scorpion for following its dharma, its nature. You have to just know that about scorpions. Don't be naive. So Sangatyaga means to develop a sober sense of the kind of association that's helpful for us in bhakti, and the kind of association that isn't, and to go out of our way to try to cultivate positive association, and to try to what's the word in gardening? To prune away unnecessary things. And pruning is a thing where you do with a plant, where there's, like, the plant can grow in so many different directions, but the gardener decides, like, I'm going to cut these things over here, these little branches, because that way that plant's internal energy will go to those branches, and that's where it's all really going to be good for them, right? Help them go to the sun, help them look good, help them thrive. You prune away the dead wood, right? This is a really important thing, pruning away dead wood on a tree, so the body of the tree just lets go of it and puts that energy somewhere else. So we may let go completely of certain relationships, and other relationships we may not completely let go of, but we don't give our heart in the same way. And that's a process of discernment. It's like, okay, I'm not going to never talk to this person. That's not practical. But what is my appropriate level of interaction? I won't treat them as if they're my most dear, spiritually aligned well-wisher, and I won't treat them like they're nothing. What is it? Where is it in between where it lines up, where I am meeting my obligation to them socially, and I'm also not I'm not allowing myself to mistreat them or see them as anything less than a divine particle of Krishna's being, and at the same time I'm not putting myself in unnecessarily in dangerous situations that erode my bhakti practice, that put me in lower modes of nature, that bring out lower habits, you know. So this is a very complicated question, and doesn't have a uniform answer for all the different relationships in our lives and for all of us hearing this. So, but the question must be asked. So there's this ongoing process of sangatyagat, giving up materialistic association, not giving our hearts away there, you know. If you give your heart away to people who will never take care of it, it's not good. And that's something we can choose not to do. You can connect with people on some level or another, but not giving your heart away, not taking on their values. Let's pause there and explore that principle if there are any questions or comments.
I think that's a really important and helpful distinction, because and if someone's just reading this, it's like, okay, don't give up association with anyone who with worldly values, right? And
Right.
many people in our sangha are married to people who don't practice bhakti,
Mhm.
right? Like this, so they're not quote unquote considered devotees, so they wouldn't call themselves devotees, or they don't even know what the word devotee is.
Right.
But Prabhupada also said, right, everyone's a devotee, whether they know it or not, right? Or is it Prabhupada who said that, or someone said this?
It's a function of our philosophy. I'm not sure who said it, but it's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like this distinction of not giving your heart away to those who can't take care of it, right? So even if it's someone who may not be, you know, a practicing devotee of bhakti yoga, if they have their own faith practice, or they're kind and they're loving and they're supportive and they're
Right.
open and they're receptive, and they can actually hear and receive your heart and the contents of it, then that is someone that you don't have to step away from
Right.
in your life.
Yeah, and like you give the example of like marriage or intimate partnership. So that's a really sacred thing in our tradition too. It's not just that, you know, one is not advised to just whimsically discard that. Like for in the broader picture, you know, making a lifelong commitment and being in a committed relationship with somebody is actually super good for society, and it's super good for individuals because it pacifies the mind. It creates a lot of stability.
Mhm.
And it meets a lot of our material needs. Like there's a lot about economic and financial development in society that wouldn't happen if people didn't get together and were committed to each other. There's a lot about emotional well-being that wouldn't happen if people didn't get together, physical well-being. So that's not to be overlooked. And so it's actually a really sacred thing that this person has made a commitment to me, I made a commitment to them. And so it's necessary. You know, let's say someone comes to bhakti and they're in a relationship, like especially they've made vows, they're in a marriage with somebody who is not directly practicing bhakti. So it may be like a place to explore how they can start to kind of talk about spirituality, but it's not like, oh, they're bad for me now.
Right.
That's black and white thinking. Is like,
Right.
well, we have our responsibilities to our families. That doesn't just go away.
Mhm.
You know, our spouses, our children, our dependents are very much part of the package of what Krishna has given to us. And so at the same time, it's like one starts to hear like, oh, actually, I really appreciate these ideas that Bhagavad Gita is giving. And the world is going to give you a lot of ideas. And they put them on billboards, you know, there's ideas everywhere. And so we get to choose what we open up our heart to with those ideas, right? Even if we don't externally cut off all the people, we're not going to do that. We do get to decide when to just nod and smile when an idea is presented to us. Just like if there's a billboard, we can choose to like not look at it. And so if somebody presents to us a lifestyle or a value or a principle that we don't align with, we don't have to take that into our heart. If we become convinced that actually, you know, I don't want to live my life that way, it's not good for me, I want to live my life this way, then that's a sacred thing. And so you should try to find people who are living like that and open your heart to them. And those who aren't, you don't take those values on. But what I've found over the years is that when people sincerely practice bhakti and they do it in a mature way where they don't neglect their relationships, they end up being happier, they end up being more functional, and they end up being an inspiration to their partner, you know? And by and large, that's a really good thing in the context of the relationship. Like, you know, parents become happy to see their children thriving. In bhakti, partners are happy to see their partners thriving. It makes you a better person. And it's very rare for someone to be like, you know, so averse to Krishna or bhakti. It's like that doesn't really happen very often. So just like, yeah, it can be the start of actually like really refreshing the relationship and bringing deepening and bringing deeper and more powerful energy into it and connecting. So thank you. Any comments or questions from the rest of the Sangha online, or Amanda and Corey?
Hello. I think a few classes ago you mentioned like the difference between like taking association and giving association. So the association kind of makes me think of what you're talking about right now with our relationships.
Yeah, giving association.
Mm.
Yeah, there's a way in which when you view somebody as a spiritual being and you treat them that way, you're giving them powerful association. Actually, when I first started meeting the devotees of in the Krishna consciousness, the Bhakti Yoga movement, in around 2009, 10. The experience that I had, it was actually visceral. It wasn't like an intellectual experience. I felt it way deep down. The experience that I had was that I was with people who really cared about me and really saw me and really valued me. Nobody was trying to make any money. In fact, they were running this little center in downtown Toronto with like a laughably low price point to come in and get like a vegan meal and a yoga class. And there wasn't any way in which they were kind of profiting that way, or they weren't getting followers or distinctions. Like they actually spent time with me and cared. And I noted that, I noticed that and I kept coming back because of it, because that is so rare in this world, actually. It is so rare because, and I know this because I got to really become close with the devotees who cultivated me. They were actually deliberately practicing treating people as spiritual parts and parcels of Krishna. And that's not a cheap thing. And when you do that, it really touches the heart. That's giving association. And I promise you, I had so many things I was talking to them about that had nothing to do with Krishna consciousness, that were so materialistic and so, pie in the sky and whatever kind of ideas I had at that time in my life. And somehow or other, they waded into that and held my hand and helped me come closer to bhakti. And I'll always be grateful for that. And I know what it felt like. And I think you can all relate to that because we're all experiencing that in our own growth in bhakti too. So it's like, they found a way to not take my association, even though they were giving it their association, and that's a service. That's a real service to do. But I will say, like, in order for them to do that, they had to have friends, they had to have family, they had to be nourished somewhere else because they weren't getting nourished by me. They weren't getting nourished by me. I promise you that. Not then. Maybe later when I was able to do something and give back to them. Just like a parent, they have to take care of themselves because they're giving so much to their kids. And for the first few years, you don't get a thank you. But you're giving your association. That's really nourishing. Parents find a lot of satisfaction in like giving selflessly, but they have to also have their peers. They have to have their partners. They have to have a society. It takes a village. They have to have all these things. They have to take care of their bodies, take care of their minds, go to the spa sometimes, go on vacation, do what you got to do, right? So all that's there so that they can they give their overflow. Otherwise, you just get burnt out. So similarly, yes, we can give our association to the degree that we're getting association, right? So when we have inspiration and care and people look at us and treat us with that kind of spiritual vision, then we can also treat others in our lives with that kind of spiritual vision. One who's become fortunate can make others fortunate. I mean, that's why I'm here. It's really because of what they did. I would not be doing this. I would not have anything in my fuel tank to give. It's really because of the overflow I've received. So it's very much a process of taking association and then giving association with discernment. And that's how this whole thing moves. Thank you. Anything else before we get to Sato Vritte, the last principle?
I was just going to add, it's actually really empowering to look at it that way. I've certainly lived a life for many years of doing what I thought was the right thing to do, that was coming from a lot of external sources and not necessarily what felt most aligned for me. And it really, for me, flips things on its head to realize and know that I can choose who to spend time with and who to give my energy to. It's really profound for me.
Yeah, sometimes we find it's really common to just kind of go with the flow for a lot of our lives. And yeah, there's this experience of feeling empowerment and realizing that we have choice. And where attention goes, energy flows. And making that choice to change the channel in our lives can and really does affect so much. There's a lot of studies on the effect of like parenting and this and that on the future of a child, and so many different factors are studied. And I don't remember the study exactly, who led it or what year, but somebody was quoting some extensive study. The biggest factor that was found is your peer group, the people that you spend your time with. outside of your family, like who you associate with. They really predict the direction you go. So in life, just generally, not even talking, this is not a study by devotees, this is just a study about people. We're like that. We take on the qualities of others. And so knowing that about ourselves, knowing that that's our nature, and using that deliberately to choose a direction and to go there and to avoid distraction is super empowering. And that's how people can do things like win Olympic gold medals or become business magnates or cross the Pacific Ocean on a raft or whatever. You know, like you just decide you want to do something and you cut out the people who say that you can't do it. You cut out the like naysayers and the envious people and the people who want to stay up all night partying or doing distractive, useless things. And you find people who are like you. And next thing you know, you're crossing the Pacific Ocean on a raft, or you're doing it, getting an Olympic medal in whatever. It's like, I wanted to do it. You're not going to find someone doing that without making those choices. It just doesn't happen. So that's what we're made of. And it's really empowering. That's how people can do amazing things. Get a PhD in this, or learn 17 languages, or become a bhakti yogi. The most revolutionary activity ever. Develop love for God. Thank you. So let's move on to the last item of this verse. And then next week, Haribol, we're going to get to verse 4, one of my all-time favorite verses anywhere, under any circumstances. So you're going to be in for a treat. The last item is Sangatagat Satovrite. Satovrite, Srila Prabhupada translates, by following in the footsteps of the great previous acharyas. Following the footsteps of the previous acharyas. Beautiful visual, you know, like you're following footsteps. So they're going somewhere. They know where they're going. They're better at it than you. You know, like if you're going through deep snow, you want to go with somebody who's ahead of you and follow their footsteps because it's less work. You know, if in a big flock of birds, you see the V formation, they take turns at the front because the one at the front does all the work practically. And if you're behind, the further back you are, the less work you have to do because there's all that air coming back at you. You can ride that thing. And so that's what we're doing. We're in a V formation with all these big birds flying away to Godhead. And we want to follow those footsteps, follow that path. And so that means, just like the negative thing is giving a bad association, we want to cultivate positive association. So developing love and appreciation for devotees and having friendship with devotees. So we need to have connection as human beings. This is not negotiable. You don't get to go through life without it. If you do, you'll seek it out and wonder why you feel incomplete. We're made for it, right? And if one tries to develop a connection with the divine without developing a connection with his parts and parcels, one will find that they're stumbling over themselves and will be unsuccessful. So the way to engage that part of ourself and our heart successfully and in a progressive way is to learn to become connected with devotees. And so that means our Sangha, our peers, and it also means our acharyas. Prabhupada and Bhaktivinoda Thakur confirm our acharyas. So it's like, just like we start our bhakti process by recognizing that there's somebody who knows more than us, it's really valuable to develop appreciation and love for those somebodies. I know in my bhakti practice, I was reading Srila Prabhupada's books for some time, even Srimad Bhagavatam, like extensively. I was on the second canto by this point. But I really started to level up in my bhakti practice when I started to follow or listen to some videos by people who had met Srila Prabhupada. There is a series of videos online called was it Following Srila Prabhupada? That's another one. It's anyway, I can send a link in the chat, but there's a series of videos by people, maybe 150 videos, 5 to 10 minutes long. People who met Srila Prabhupada, whether or not they became devotees, who relate stories of Prabhupada memories. They're called Prabhupada memories. And you can see their face, you can hear their voice when they're talking about what it was like when they were 15, 20, 30 years old, who knows. They met Srila Prabhupada and how he interacted with them. And it was so humanizing for me. Because, you know, Srila Prabhupada in his purports is laying down the law. He's got a really important service to do, and he's doing it. Mm-hmm. And Srila Prabhupada, as it turns out, you may not know this, was an unbelievable human being. He did a lot of things really, really well. He was a terrific musician. He was a great linguist. He was very, very funny. He was very, very jovial. He was very sweet. He could be extremely fiery, especially in terms of protecting people when he felt people were being threatened. There's a lot of sides to his personality. He was a complete human. He had mastered the different arts and sciences of bhakti. There was a time in our movement when he was the senior devotee. There were no other senior devotees. It was him and a bunch of kids trying to follow him. Now we're so fortunate we have senior devotees. For once upon a time, it was just Srila Prabhupada, this one person that Krishna had empowered in such a way that he could actually be the senior devotee. So who is that person? How did they get to be who they are? So studying his life as an acharya, even studying his upbringing and his becoming who we saw later in the 60s and 70s, is very powerful, because we can see what his choices were and what we can try to do in our position, and also be inspired. And this is practical, because we want to know the process works, and we don't really know that until we see it embodied in somebody else, because it's a personal process. It's not like just an abstract process. So we need to be around devotees who inspire us, and we need to hear about devotees who inspire us. You know, I've always been inspired by Srila Prabhupada. I find a lot of inspiration in other acharyas, such as Bhaktivinoda Thakur. That's why I quote him. I have a lot of love and appreciation for Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And it's a really valuable thing, because you can start to pray to these people. You know, they're not on the planet. You can pray to them. You can ask for their help. You can develop a relationship with their writings. You can start to get a sense of them as a person. These are our guides. They're our well-wishers. These are people, especially when we're talking about these acharyas, who have dedicated their lives to helping others. That's what they do for fun. When they have a spare minute, they help others. They have no spare minutes. They're always helping others. That's what they get deep satisfaction from. So to see people like us trying to practice bhakti was their great dream. Rupa Goswami lived in a place called Terrakadamba in Vrindavan, in a simple grove. I've been there. And it's beautiful to think that when he was living there, he composed the Nectar of Instruction. What was in his heart when he was thinking, how can this literature go around the world and end up in Burlington, Vermont, or New Zealand? What was the vision of Rupa Goswami and the dedication that let him put that much purity into this message, that here it is now in our lap, courtesy of Prabhupada and all of his, gurus. So that compassion, that mercy, that dedication, that's there in all these generations of acharyas. Don't overlook it. They're so valuable. They're so indispensable. The last thing I'll say about that is that the word acharya itself is actually really powerful, as it is always with Sanskrit. Achar and prachar are two things. Your prachar is really simple, easy to remember. It's like you're preaching, prachar preaching, what you say. Your achar is what you do, your conduct. An acharya is one whose conduct matches what they say, is one who walks the talk, whose conduct matches what they say and what they've heard they should do. They've really walked the talk. That's what an acharya is. That's why we follow their footsteps. And they're rare and beautiful. And it doesn't matter if they're not on the planet anymore. Hearing about them, thinking about them, praying to them, developing a relationship with them is entirely possible to do and is highly advised. So do it and enjoy. So we'll pause there. We can take any comments, questions, reflections on any of these principles. Variegated activities in devotional service, abandoning the association of non-devotees or not opening our hearts that way, and following the footsteps of the previous acharyas. These 6 principles undoubtedly assure the complete success of pure devotional service. Om Tat Sat. Anything to reflect? Let's have at least one reflection.
I think it's beautiful that your level of appreciation for our acharyas is really evident, and that you can speak about them and feel and be moved just by speaking about them and recalling what they've done for us and all the sacrifices, and then not even thinking that it's sacrifices, and just know that it's their dharma and what they're here to do, and that comes through hearing and reading and studying and inquiring and listening to videos on them, and that's possible for anyone to cultivate that type of respect and really live this 6th aspect of the 3rd verse, and so that it builds more confidence and not only as I'm seeing this happen in my peers or those that are more advanced than me in Bhakti, but like this is the living proof, this is the story of
Right.
the life of these acharyas who then became saintly beings.
Right. And it's interesting because, you know, with people like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, we accept them as eternal associates of Krishna, but in their Leela, their pastimes on this planet, they don't always manifest that from the beginning. They manifest an arc because we need that. They come from somewhere. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is practically orphaned. He came from a great tribulation, lost a lot of his family, he was like living in a really interesting time in India's history. There's so many things he went through. Prabhupada went through so many things. You know, he had so many challenges. He had trouble in his marriage at different times. There's troubles in India. He had financial troubles, so many things. And it's like, are we going to have those kinds of things in our lives? Yeah, that's life. And so when we hear how Prabhupada handled it, Bhaktivinoda Thakur handled it, how Rupa Goswami handled it, you know, he's at a job, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, he hates, he doesn't want to do it anymore. He's fallen in love with Lord Chaitanya. He wants to practice bhakti. What did he do? Did he just ditch? It's like, there's a delicate way in which he disengaged himself, like hearing about that, you know, it's really inspiring, and it's also really practical. So that arc, that personal arc, is part of how the Lord uses his devotees to leave practical guidance for us. You know, that's why the Bhagavatam is such an important shastra, and it's presented the way it is. The Bhagavatam is not so much instructive, it's actually a series of stories, and in the stories you hear about the lives and activities of great devotees from different planets and in different ages. It's a universal book of records of the most amazing stories of people in relationship to their, like, about their relationship with Krishna, the divine. When you hear about that, you know, it touches the heart more than someone wagging their finger and telling you, do this, don't do that. You know, it's like, this is what their life was like. This is what it was like for Prahlad Maharaj. Or this is what it's like for the residents of Vrindavan. This is what it's like for Arjuna. This is what it's like for Mother Kunti. This is what it's like for Srila Prabhupada. These are all real people. And it's absolutely possible and advisable to develop a relationship. And their arc is super nourishing for us. Yeah, Bhishma Dev. I mean, the list goes on. Thank you. Any other reflections? Oh, there's one in chat. Curiosity, sign off. Thank you. Hare Krishna. I will say, so for this week, if you haven't read the third verse, read through it, and then read through the fourth verse and purport. So verse and purport 3 and 4, because we're going to start on 4. And
read the whole verse 4.
Yeah, and if you can't, at least half of it. And it's about the 6 loving exchanges. It's about how to exchange love and bhakti and the practice of connecting. And so reflect something from the class, from what you heard. And one thought exercise is on this principle of association, because we talked a lot about that. We heard about giving up undesirable association and taking on positive association. Reflect something, you know, some realization you have, observation you have about the principle of association and how it's played out in the world around you, how you see it, you know, like maybe, like somebody was saying, I think, forget who was saying earlier, it was Aaron, that it's so empowering to decide, like, I can actually choose how I direct my energy, and it makes a difference. It's like, okay, so reflect on this principle of association and how it's played out in the society around you. How has it been misapplied? How has it been applied? Do you know any great athletes who decided to, like, really focus and hang out with other athletes and became Olympic medalists? Have you seen that in yourself? Have you seen people get dragged away by bad association? I mean, we all have examples of this. Are there places, you know, on the internet that are full of really bad association? Like, ding, ding, ding. I can think of a few right now, you know? So it's like, talk about that. Talk about some ways in which this principle of association as a degrading or elevating principle is perhaps unconsciously playing out in the world around us as a principle of Dharma. It's just the way the world works. We're all taking and giving association. So describe that. And we can take another reflection, or we can end here. It's up to you. I've had a great time. If anyone wants to share another reflection, that would be cherry on top. I won't complain. Anything that stood out, doesn't have to be a question, but those are good too.
Well, I just like that you said that
Yes.
following the biographies of
Mm.
teachers. I just happened to stumble onto Radhanath Swami's
Right.
podcast on Spotify, and just hearing his story that, you know, he was raised in a Jewish household in Chicago. So I felt so connected because that's me.
So
And
relatable.
how did that happen? And then he went and hitchhiked to India and London and all these places. And now I'm just so fascinated
Right.
by his, and now I feel like, I have to read the Journey Home.
You haven't read the Journey Home?
No.
Yeah.
Oh,
I will say
God,
one of
it's what
the,
it-
one of the best books, one of the best books that I know for people who have no exposure to Bhakti and they're not necessarily ready for like a whole philosophical presentation is the book of Journey Home,
Okay,
because it's an amazing read. It's just, you can't put it down. It's a lot of fun.
okay.
And you will practically, without even knowing what you're doing, take in a lot of spiritual wisdom. If you're already reading Bhagavad Gita, you're already reading Shastra, it may not be strictly speaking necessary, but read it because it's great. And if you know people who want to know what Bhakti is all about, but they just kind of want a good story, get them that book.
Get 'em a book.
Nobody in the
Maybe
history of that book has ever
unbelievable.
not loved it. It's so great because it's just such a relatable story, and it's full of so much drama. And it's something he didn't want to tell, but his friends and god brothers were like, you have to tell this story. It's too good.
Yeah.
So turns out they were right. So yeah, great reflection.
Yeah.
Swami, he's that bad. He made a promise to tell us that.
Yeah, his god brother Bhakti Tirtha Swami, who was leaving untimely, had a long illness. He said, I'm requesting you, my parting wish is that you tell this story. He promised, and they were best friends. So
Yeah.
we're thankful to him for extracting that promise. Because it's good.
It's also on Audible.
Yeah.
It's not enough.
Right.
Yeah, so if you need inspiration, you want a biography, that's good. You could share it with those who also want that. Good
There's a
example of that
whole-
principle.
There's a whole biography on Prabhupada.
Yeah, there's actually not just a whole biography. I brought a whole bunch of books from Toronto. There's a stack now of books written by Prabhupada's disciples and well-wishers. I have at least 15 different books about Prabhupada, because he's just that amazing, you know. So it never gets old reading. I can recommend if you want to know more. I will send a link in the chat. So remind me, please, about the Prabhupada Memories videos on YouTube. They're free. They're like tidbit, bite-sized things you can watch, and they're all super cool and inspiring. So there's that.
Yeah,
On
I watched those.
Yes, you watch
And
those?
It's interesting to see them as well, because it's senior disciples now, and I think it was done like in the 90s, so
Yeah,
they're looking a lot younger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of them aren't even disciples. There's people who just liked Prabhupada and thought he was cool.
Right.
And we found them and asked them, okay, could you reflect what he was like in the 70s? So if there's no further comments, reflections, we'll end here. See you next week for verse 4 and on WhatsApp.
Can I make a couple announcements?
Yes, announcements.
First, I have been putting things in the WhatsApp group a lot. I'm trying to slowly put them in, but the newsletter went out and we have some new things going on. One is we have a calendar now that Caitlin created for us, so that will be updated, a Google Calendar. And then this Friday, we're starting the first morning program here. So Fridays from 6 to 7 a.m. And there's also going to be a Zoom link, and the computer will be back there, so you can have darshan of Mahaprabhu. So it's 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern time. And you also can come in person. We'll sing some of the morning songs from the temple, have a little space for japa, and Shamya will likely give a short, like an abbreviated class on something all in an hour. So we're gonna do our best with that. And I feel like there was one other announcement that was relevant to this, but yeah, I just wanted to bring up the survey again. If you haven't filled out the survey, because you're talking about find the things that you love and then make them an offering. So many of you have already done that, but if you haven't filled that out, we're creating more. We want to create more and more programs that are not just led by us, but led by you as well, and other ways that we can engage you. So just please fill that out also in the WhatsApp chat.
Jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Srila Rupa Goswami ki jai.
Jai.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. See you online, on YouTube, on WhatsApp, and next week. Haribol. Thank you.
Bye, sweet souls. Haribol.